Yep, it's working. It's fine. I remember Reverend DeBeer and Reverend Boaz speaking from here, and I feel rather short in comparison to them. We passed out two papers, and I made 50 copies, and there are more than 50 people here, so some of you didn't get it. But the one handout is this slide. On the back of it is a map of where we'll get to that. All right, this is a slide. This is in the book also. These are the people that donated toward the publication of this book. We had 310 books published, and we've given out about 10% of them. So there's plenty left at the museum to buy today, 9 to 4, tomorrow, 1 to 4. And then the museum is going to try to find other places to make this book available. You can also get it at the community center until 3 o'clock today. For those on this list, those people donated toward our publication costs, the reason we could print 310 books. And they all received donor books. The gold level, 3 books, the silver level, 2 books, and the bronze level, 1. And the supporters there gave us some money, but not enough to get the donor book that was given to these people. If you are on that list, we'd like you to pick your book up at the community center, then we can get you properly registered. Now here is the book, 345 pages. What I handed out on the back side of that is a general outline of the book. And I'm going to be talking about the Cook family today. So this other handout, and you all didn't get it, you ran out again, it is the family tree for the Cook ranch and for the Carpenter family. Now this is in the appendix of the book, if you happen to have that with you, which few of you do. We certainly cannot cover the 345 pages of this book very well, and I've decided to leave Hiram Wheeler and the Carpenters off this presentation completely. The Carpenters were married in 2 ways to the Cook family. William Oscar, Bill Carpenter's family in Michigan, 2 of his children married 2 of Charles Willard Cook's children. So the Carpenters have a close tie to this family also. Our book begins in 1610 with Josiah Cook being born in London. And his father was a fustian dresser, which means that he kept the mills of London, the water-powered mills, fed with the fabric that is similar to a corduroy today, and was the working class uniform of the era. I also wanted to point out here on this page that Jolene Detlinger was the editor for our book, and Jolene is here. And Jolene, many of you will recall Jolene from giving presentations about the Cook Ranch over a 30-year period anyway, right, Jolene? Jolene has been very supportive of helping us get this book done, and she's given us her notes as well in writing the book. I say us and we in the book. I wrote most of the book, but I wrote all the book. But I consider we to be Jolene, my son Dan, my wife Alice. We're all a part of this, getting this book finished. Click. Okay, some of you remember, this was 11 years ago. We took the Cook Corn Trophy from Iowa State, borrowed it, the museum borrowed it, and had it on display in it was in the Adams Bank. Well, was it Adams Bank, was it, John?
First State.
First State. Now it's a different bank. But this picture was taken by my daughter-in-law, Teresa, you could tell, the Etler, from what was called the Gunner's Gallery. They had a gallery here where they put armed protectors, and this bank was not robbed in the era when the gangsters used machine guns. What is sad is there are at least 7 or 8 people in this photo that are no longer with us. My father is not here. He actually fell asleep in the chair at home and missed the photo. But he said he would have been the 8th or 9th person that is dead here. There's some that are died awfully young, and there's some that told me they were hanging on for this book. So I'm glad that we finally got it done. Okay, click. This is the central plant for Brookmont Farm. It's just 1975 on that. When I was a boy, and you see the trees in the upper corner here, that's where I grew up. I moved there when I was 6 with my parents. And we used to be the George Noy farm, George E. Noy. And when I was 10 or so, I worked up enough courage to come up and check out these old buildings. At the time, Alice and Neil Wright lived in the mansion, but the buildings were little used other than for maybe some storage or get some large equipment out of the weather. The mill, the building that stands alone there, it had a spiral staircase inside, and I eventually worked up the courage to climb that spiral staircase, and there was a cupola on the top of that with a window in it. You could see Audible from there, which I thought was amazing at the time. Right behind the mill is one of the corn cribs, and it was 196 feet long, and we could hold 50,000 bushels of ear corn, I believe, was the claim. There was a twin right beside it. There were 2. And that other one burned in 1907. But this crib lasted until the buildings were all burned down in roughly 1983. Then the mansion was burned in 88. Click. I'm only able to, in the time allowed, I'm only able to touch upon sections of the book. And in this particular section, the book starts out in following the family history to Willard Cook. And Willard Cook lived in Haddam, Connecticut. And he married Abigail Brainerd, and the Brainards were, well, if you know Connecticut today, the Brainards are still famous in Connecticut. And the Brainards owned a quarry at the time. And Willard, by virtue of him marrying one of the sisters of the heirs, ended up with the third ownership of that quarry. And he worked regularly at this quarry for many years until the mid-40s, when he and his wife realized that the quarry wasn't going to sustain 3 families. So they decided to move to the prairie in Illinois. And Willard did that and they brought all their children with them. And Charles Cook was the third child, the second son. And he had, it ended up with him in Libertyville, Illinois. It became a pivotal spot for Charles because he gained farming experience from there. He actually raised beef cattle that were sold to butchers in Chicago. So he had a love or a desire to have a beef farm, and that's what he would eventually end up buying the Cook Ranch for. You can back up a bit. I think I'm missing one. Okay, there's Willard. Back up to another one. Let's go back to those photos.
That one?
Wow.
Or the others? Those?
This one here.
Yeah.
This is Willard Cook. Willard Cook was the man that moved his family from Connecticut to Illinois, to Libertyville. And right near Libertyville, the people that actually attended the same church that they attended was the Wheeler family. And he knew Hiram Wheeler from when he was a boy. Hiram Wheeler established the Adams Ranch out here south of town. And Hiram would later recommend to Charles Cook that he buy farm ground out here. Now, the oldest son, Ansel, he served, I think it was 3 terms in the Illinois legislature and 2 terms as a Chicago City Council person. And he was actually the interim mayor of Chicago for a time. He and Willard established the W&A.B. Cook Company stone business in Chicago. And Willard had all this experience from Connecticut. So he was a natural. They supplied the original stones for the Chicago Water Tower, and that's on Michigan Avenue now, and the adjoining power plant. Those things are no longer in use, but they're still tourist attractions. So if you're in Chicago, you should look up the Chicago Water Tower. And you know that it was built by Willard and Cook and his son Ansel. This is the farm. The house up here is no longer standing, but it was a farmhouse that Willard and his wife Abigail built after they had moved to Illinois. Ansel Cook would lose his wife to a train fire. Not a fire, but a train wreck. And he ended up marrying Anna and Emily Barrows. Now, those are pictures that are of children. He married Anna 35 years after this photo was taken, and Emily 45 years. They were cousins of Charles Willard Cook's second wife, Jenny. And the matchmaker had quite a bit of land to manage, and on that lot ground he managed, he had a rotation of corn and hay for his cattle, and then he also had a beef farm. That's where he sold his beef to the butchers in Chicago. This was before the Chicago Union Stockyards. Yeah, you can see that I'm jumping around here. So in 1860, Charles initially worked with Ansel and Willard in the stone business, but eventually he got into the development business. And he developed the first stone building west in western Chicago. And this development must have moved well for him because he ended up buying several other businesses. And actually, they say he got burnt out. Now, they were drafting for the Civil War at the time, so that may be, Civil War at the time. So it may not have been burnt out, but Charles did end up living on a farm by Oak Park, Illinois, where all three of his children were born, and where he did little else but farm for those 3 years. He did, however, he did continue to develop and to serve as a financial consultant. And through that, he made quite a bit of money. This is their house that they built following the residents at Oak Park. We don't know where in Oak Park they were. But this is the house in Geneva, Illinois. And it is owned by an attorney and his wife who had great interest in historic preservation. And they have restored this Italian-made house to what it originally was. At this house, they were residing in 1871 when the Chicago fire happened. And their neighbors all came there and so they could go up on the roof and see the fire all the way to Chicago. But it still had been over the horizon. His first wife, Sarah Ann Cooley, the mother of the 3 children, died in this house in 1872. And he was lucky to find Jenny Wade Sturgis. Now, Jenny brought with her mother we had to deal with, but Jenny was an excellent mother to the 3 children. Click back. This is a picture taken on the front porch of that Geneva house in the early 1870s. One of the early photos. And sitting in the front yard is Charles Ira Cook, the older brother, and Albert Cook is the boy sitting on the steps, and their sister Emma is sitting beside Jenny Wade Cook, and her father is behind her, Charles W. He was a bald man. And on the left is the photo. In the front is a man in a white hat. Now he was a doctor. And I had a live-in doctor for when Sarah was there, and I don't think he lasted much longer. But he did marry the woman standing in the back, who was the housekeeper for the Cooks. And then Grandma Wade is sitting in between those 2. And Grandma Wade was quite the person. Okay, click. Okay, so now we are to the Brookmont Farm. Charles Cook, upon the advice of Hiram Wheeler, the owner of the ranch out in Louisville, bought the 12 square miles of farm ground from the Iowa Railroad Land Company for $5 an acre. Now, the maps they used at the time and the land sales were darn quick. And they ended up selling to Charles in 80, that in the northeast part of the farm, that was owned by the Youngberg family. And he never did farm that ground. And the northwest quarter of section 27 was also owned by another family. He never farmed that ground. He sold his holdings in the northeast quarter of section 28 to his first superintendent, Jacob Anderson. And Jacob thought he had bought a quarter, but he had actually only bought a 40, because that government had already granted that land to soldiers in the Indian Wars, Black Hawk Wars, I guess it was called. And he ended up, Charles ended up only owning a 40 of that quarter, and he sold that to Jacob. The other 3 40s Jacob bought from the person that got the grant. And then the next quarter over was also owned by another family, which had already been sold. So in essence, the Cook owned 11 acres and 11 sections and 120 acres. It's still the largest farm in Iowa, but it was not the 12 that he paid for. And if he did actually not get reimbursed from the railroad land company, then he spent $5 and 15 cents an acre for his ground. Okay, let's go to the next click. This is in Charles Cook. He was the original owner of the Cook Ranch. He bought it from Marvin Huggin of the Northwestern Railroad Company. And then the man beside him is Jacob Anderson. He was the first superintendent of the farm. And that picture comes from the Odebo paper in 1926. He was the first pioneer that they interviewed in 26, which was the 50th anniversary of the founding of Odebo. And then beside him was Hiram Wheeler, the owner of the Wheeler Ranch. That's to the south here. This is a photo of the Lucius Treadway gravestone in Cook Township Cemetery. Lucius was the first, I wouldn't call him a superintendent, he was the first caretaker of the farm. And he lived just north of the farm in section 27, 30, 31, 19, section 19, which is right above the Cook Ranch. I think Kevin here? Kevin, did you? No. He used to live there, I wonder. Anyway, across the road from Lucius, in section 20, was a dairy farm owned by Hiram Wheeler. Hiram had a dairy farm north of the ranch. In fact, just north of the ranch. And he had at least 60 cows, probably 100 cows. That was his goal, to have 100 cows in rural Sac County when there was no market for the milk, no towns at all. He made cheese at the time, and he sold that. But the wastes from the dairy farm were ideal food for hogs. And Charles Cook had hogs, a lot of hogs, eventually marketing 5,000 head a year of hogs. And Charles built tenant farms, half-section tenant farms on his holdings. And the first ones he built were up by that dairy, so he could feed the hogs that dairy waste. And Charles also had a habit of buying horses from the Chicago streetcar companies. Those horses where their hooves were wore out quickly, pulling the streetcar on the hard surface, but brought to the soft soil of Brookmont Farm, the horses proved to be a very good buy for Charles. Now they had 200 teams of horses to work for working the farms. So that's a tremendous amount of horses. And then the middle, at the bottom there, I have shown a Hereford cow and her calf, because Charles Cook went to London and England and bought 306 head of purebred Herefords that he brought back to this country. It was the largest importation of Hereford purebred cattle at the time. Now, I don't know if there's been any larger since then. In addition to the 306 cattle, there were 10 live-born calves that resulted from this purchase. They were born on the trains or on the ships that eventually brought the cattle to Odebo. But he had to, he hired a friend from Illinois to oversee the whole thing. He sent him to England, where they hired 15 Hereford herdsmen to come back to the U.S. with these cattle on a specially chartered ship. And they had to spend 90 days of quarantine in Quebec, Canada. And then they were brought to Odebo by train. And they arrived at the Trinity Depot out here in late September of 1884. Maybe 3. You have to look at the book and read. I don't remember. I was thinking here something my son pointed out to me I had forgotten, and that was the pastor of this church was a young man. I don't remember the name. I didn't look it up, but he was the first full-time pastor of this church. It wasn't this building, but it was this church. So he would have been in town to see the cattle arrive. And eventually he became the president of Ohio State University and oversaw the construction of their 110,000 seat football stadium in the 20s. Click. Now this is Charles Iowa. Charles Iowa was the chosen one. He was the one that was supposed to take over for Charles W. Cook. And he truly loved the farm. But he got tuberculosis, a bad case of tuberculosis in his teen when he was 15 or 16. And he was sent on a stretcher to Colorado at the time. Now this was before any of the tuberculosis sanitariums, before they thought they knew how it was communicated. They thought it was hereditary. So he actually went out to Colorado in shame that he was a victim of tuberculosis. But he had a miracle cure. He came back to the farm, not much, after just a few months, and he lived a long life. I would like to know if he coughed all the time or not, like so many tuberculosis victims do. But he did stay at the farm when the rest of his family would go off on vacation or go back to Chicago because he did not want to suffer that same thing again. He was only early 20s, probably 21, when the Hereford cattle were bought. And his father sent him out on trains to the western United States. This was the country this side of the Rocky Mountains at the time. He did this for 7 years, and he sold Brookmont Herefords out on the plains. And to this day, roughly 30% of the Hereford bloodlines are from that Brookmont Hereford herd. And that's largely due to Charles Ira Cook. Click. I don't have a slide more about Charles, but Charles married Elizabeth Carpenter. And Elizabeth came to the ranch for a year, for the first year, 1890 about. And she was homesick. She was a Chicago girl. She was used to the city. And out here on the prairie, she just couldn't take it. She couldn't handle it. And Charles Ira came home from his western trips on his trains to selling at Herefords, where he had just wrote a letter to his father saying how Brookmont was his favorite place in the whole world. And Elizabeth announces, I can't stay here. We gotta move to a metropolitan area. They tried Omaha, that didn't work. He tried to patent his corn crib, which was wood slats with wire that could be put up and taken down for corn. We do that all the time when I was a kid. Snow fence is what we use. Well, that's what he ran up against. There's a guy that had patented the same thing for snow fence. And the snow fence guy got the advantage of the corn crib idea that Charles Ira Cook had. So, seeing that that wasn't going to work for them in Omaha, and knowing hardwood was in Michigan, Charles Ira went to Michigan with his wife, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was the daughter of William Oscar Carpenter. Click. Oh no, go back. In 1893 was the Chicago Exposition. There was the 401st anniversary of Columbus discovering America. There's a lot of things wrong with that now, we know on dates, but it was the 400th anniversary of that. And Chicago built a great white city out of pine boards and whitewash. This top left picture is the lagoon that was the center part of the Chicago Exposition. In the center here is Cracker Jack corn, popcorn symbol. Odebo has a colorful popcorn history, and I did not get into it in my book, but that is something that should be explored. Supposedly, and this is the Cook family believes this, but my reading is less certain about that. The Ruckheim brothers in Chicago they wanted to put up a tree that would be well accepted by the people.
Bad.
Bad?
It's good.
Okay. And they decided to mix molasses with popcorn and nuts. This was the first snack food made in America, Cracker Jack, and it became wonderfully popular. Now, this was before Cracker Jack had their own cribs. They bought popcorn from a Chicago marketer. And anyway, that marketer,
Peter
look
Smyer.
at his name, he would eventually buy Cracker, or he would eventually sell the Cracker Jack. But at this time, they bought their popcorn from this marketer who bought all his popcorn from Cook Ranch. And the Cook family believes that the original popcorn in the Cracker Jack treat at the 1893 Chicago Exposition was popcorn from the Cook Ranch. Now, I've since read that Cracker Jack invented their snack in 1896, which was 3 years after the fact. So I don't know, but that is the history as far as the Cooks are concerned. The two photos on the right are the 2 mansions that Charles Cook built. He built the first one in 1891, and I neglected to tell you about the big barn that he had built. He built what was called the world's largest barn for those Herefords that he brought from England. This barn had a feed processing plant built into the cupola on the barn. The barn was 200 by 200. My son and I even disagree on where it was built. We don't know where it was built, but it was taken down 7 years later for 2 reasons. One, the Herefords didn't need the barn. They were fine with open front sheds on the prairie, in the wintertime, the prairies. And the other was that this fancy feed processing mill did not work very well for him at all. So the barn was torn down, and the wood was used to build this first mansion, the big one at the top. And it was also used to build smaller open front sheds around the ranch. where they kept their cattle at some of the tenant farms. This mansion had elevators that ran from the basement to the third floor. There were two of them. And it was built with open hallways. And anyway, it burned in 1895, and it burned rather quickly. Overnight, it was gone. And then they built the second mansion, which is at the bottom here, in 1895. And it lasted until it was voluntarily burned in 1988. The book has some inside pictures of that particular mansion. Click. Okay, this is Charles Cook with his 3 wives, before marriage and after marriage. I'm not saying anything other than you could lose your hair. And we could maybe blame that on Grandma Wade, who was Jenny's constant companion. Jenny was actually born in a foreign country, the Republic of Texas, in Galveston. Sophronia was there with her newborn daughter and her older son, Henry, because her husband, John Wade, was an officer in the Texas Navy. He had originally been a sea captain. He took a boat from Galveston to Mexico and back, where he actually transported some slaves. This then is the last picture of Jenny Wade that was delivered to Ansel Cook's mansion in Libertyville by Albert Cook in the 1950s, when Albert was 90 years old. And on the back of this photo, he wrote, a finer woman never lived, which is quite a compliment for a lady who didn't have any children of her own and raised those 3 good children. Like, this was the mansion in Libertyville that Ansel built. Helen died in there following her train accident. And he left the mansion to the city of Libertyville and the grounds for a park and a library. And it served as the town's library for several years. Click. Abigail Cook was one of the 4 children born in Haddam, Connecticut. She was the sister to Charles and Ansel. And Abigail, she's always sitting like this, always old. There's always a young lady sitting beside her. And for the life of us, we didn't know why this was the case. But then she finally acknowledged her impairment in her 90s. She lived to be 90, almost 100 years old. And she was struck down by polio in the 1860s after she married John Menson, who's the gentleman on the far right in the front row. And she was confined to a wheelchair for 60 years of her life. And they employed a young woman to take care of her in the home and to travel with her. John Menson was a master carriage maker. He made it. The elite of Chicago would hire him to make their carriages. And his greatest claim to fame is having made the carriage and the stand that held the open casket of Abraham Lincoln when they had his funeral in Chicago. Most of us will know that Lincoln was from Illinois. And this was Albert Cook in the front with his wife and their first 3 children. Click. Okay, Albert built the big buildings of the central plant. There's 2 big corn cribs, the big machinery hall, the mill, in the late 1890s, early 1900s. He also built the twin houses across the road. The Keys house and the Etler house were twin houses. And he also expanded the superintendent's house so that it would be a office for the branch. He hosted, the second point here, he hosted cattle feeding research for Iowa Agricultural College, later Iowa State University. And but he voluntarily did this. He went to Ames to do this. He got cold feet about the third year and called the whole thing off. He was of the opinion that that feeding cattle wasn't what they should be doing for research. They should be doing everything they could to produce more feedstock for the livestock. And he was right. He also had a corn seed business. He believed that, this was before hybrid corn, he believed that if you planted good seed, you could get the best crop. And he had a special seed shed set up. Click. And we'll get to that eventually, I think. This is Albert in 1905 and Christina in 1905. They were married there on the farm north of town in 1892. It was a social event of Sac County for sure. On the right is, at the top, is a picture of the kid's pony. And seated on the kid, there from front to back is Alberta, Christina, Charles, Jesse, and Willard. Girl, boy, girl, boy. Alberta would drown in a stock tank. The little gal in the front was drowned in a stock tank probably in a month after this picture was taken in May of 1905, thereabouts. And she's buried out here at this cemetery. She's the only cook that's buried here. Everybody else is buried in Chicago. Click. Okay, this is the only picture we have of the second corn crib before it burned. In between the corn cribs was a patented unloading shed designed by S.E. Kurtz from Sac City. They could dump the whole wagon into a cart, then pull the wagon ahead, and there was a rope hooked to the axle of the wagon that pulled that cart up to the top of the crib. And then that cart would dump into another cart that could run the length of the crib and dump corn to the sides. This picture on the upper right is of the feedlots that extended between, where I used to live, from the ranch west down the hill. There were 10 feedlots set up for that feeding test that Cook had established. And if you look, I'm going to bring on that. I was going to bring a pointer here, but on that top row, you see the open front sheds that were on the feedlots, and you see the feed mill behind it, and then behind it, in the very background, is the water tank, the water tower that they built. And right beside it to the south is a building that we believe was the first superintendent's house. And it was roughly 28 by 28. Albert put a 60-foot addition on that, and we think that 60-foot addition was taken by Alvin Reich and used for a house on their property. At least my mother thinks that anyway. Then in the bottom center here is the twin houses. They were both bought by, you have to read in the book who bought it. He sold the west house, the other house, to Trader down the hill. and that was hauled by a mule train down to the next farmstead to the west. And that's the house that I grew up in. And then this is the Keith's house, which is stayed where it was at. That's gone. All these buildings are now gone. So part of the reason for our book here is to document that memory. Okay, click. This is the seed shed. Albert hired a professor from Kansas Ag College to head up his seed business. That's how important it was to him. And this man lived in one of those twin houses. And they found the best ears of corn from the centers of the fields, and they took the center kernels from that corn for seed. These are the drying racks where each ear was individually mounted to be dried for seed. Then Albert would germinate test the seed as well to make sure that he had good seed. His tenants had to buy the seed from him. Then he bought the crop from them. Okay, click. How we do our time here?
We got the time.
I'll have to go fast. Almost. This is Albert Coughlin sold the ranch. It took him 9 years to do it. He sold it from $165 up to $450 an acre. The last farms. So the one that was right north of the half section, in the section north of where I live, sold for $450. Alvin Reich spent $450 more than the ground that he bought. Albert had mortgages on all the ground, $100 to $200 an acre, and he required that the buyers assume those mortgages. So then this rate is including that mortgage. This was in the World War I era, and there would have been a spike in land pricing at that time. Okay, this, after he'd sold all his Hereford cattle and sold the ranch, they moved to Kankakee, Illinois. And they actually traded some land they had in Monona County for the B. Harley Bradley House, which is claimed by the Wright and Kankakee organization to be the first Frank Lloyd Wright full prairie design house. And Alice and I have toured that, and it's a good tour. If you're ever in Kankakee, certainly a house worth seeing. They traded that house for a lakeshore house in Evanston, Illinois, on Lake Michigan, and a Michigan farm. And they threw a quarry, the sheriff of quarry into the deal. They also bought, right after they sold Brookmont, they bought the Mid-Dow mansion and farm. It was I think a 270-acre farm in Hinsdale, Illinois. Later Clarendon, Illinois. And this mansion was drawn up by the Library of Congress. So we have drawings, but we don't have pictures. Click. So after Cook left Otago, he had a lot of investments. On the left here is all of the investments that he had in Kankakee. He built a sales pavilion for Tom Sotham, concrete, much like his machinery hall at Brookmont. But that went south quickly, and he ended up with the building. And he operated his auto farmer company and Cook Motors company through that building. He also ended up with quite a bit of real estate in the Kankakee area and established a real estate development company. And then there's these other Cook investments that are all over the country, and thousands of acres. He invested 8,000 acres on 4 farms in Monona County, Iowa, when they were building drainage ditches. So he'd buy the ground for $25 an acre, then they would put in the drainage system, and then he'd sell it for $150 an acre. And he did that over and over. So he made a lot of money that way. He ended up trading, he had a nearly 4,000 acre farm in Minnesota that he called Brookmont 2, where he raised quite a few hogs and some cattle. It was a wet farm. I've been there, it's not far from where I live. The Plymouth Hotel in Chicago was then traded for the Minnesota farm. And he spent $500,000 remodeling the Plymouth Hotel. He must have done all right by it, because he did it again. He bought a bank building in Omaha and did the same thing there. He also owned a 7,000 acre ranch on the Yellowstone River in Montana, and a 1,000 acre alfalfa seed farm in Utah, and a plantation in Louisiana. So the stories about him being broke when he left here is greatly exaggerated. But he spent a lot of time and a lot of investments after he left. Click. This is Charles Ira in Cook in Michigan. He also bought a large farm and tried to run a dairy and failed miserably. This house in the middle picture is from the home that he and his wife inherited on Lake Michigan in Menominee. On the right is the stone where Charles Ira is buried in Menominee, and beside it on the left is the granddaughter of Charles, probably a great-granddaughter, Charles Cook, Elizabeth Musto, and on the right is Charlie W. Cook and his wife. And Charlie gave us a great amount of information about the Cooks in Michigan. And again, Charles Ira married Elizabeth Cook, and his sister married Frederick Ives Cook. Click. This is the sale barn in Kankakee. It still stands as a truck warehouse now. Click. Here is what he tried to manufacture out of that building. The auto farmer was a self-propelled disc that he actually patented when he was still north of town here. But that, I think, was ahead of its time. Didn't make any traction. On the right are the auto farmer, where he tried to convert the Model T to tractor power. And he invested $2 million of his own money into this, and they didn't make it anyway. And then the Cook truck, he switched over to try to produce the truck. And that was a highly competitive market also. It's a fine looking truck, but he did not make any money doing that either. Click. The engineer, Thomas Van Til, is with the truck here. He had a good idea on a nice truck, and he did sell a few, but he didn't make it long term. Click. This is street signs in Kankakee, in that development area that Cook developed. He named the streets after his family and Brookmont. Click. And then this is the cemetery where the Cooks were buried, Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. Weird place to visit, but I've been there a couple times, and the last time we had a coyote stalking the house. So look out for that. Click. This is the last picture of it. Elter took. He lived a long life, he died in the 1950s, and this is the mansion that he left behind. I will say that the cover book is a pen and ink drawing of that same mansion, and the artist was Jolene Etler, and Jolene has some of her prints available for sale in the community center today, if you'd like to check them out. Well, I probably took most of the hour, but there's a few questions. I'll take them.